A very, zeitgeisty. What does this mean for reforms in France?
So, of course, with this large majority, that should mean that he'll be able to push through reforms. But with 350 seats, it is not as big as we may have expected just a week ago. The opposition from the Republican Party, the right-wing party, for example, remains strong with their allies. They still have nearly 140 seats. Then you got the National Front leader, Marine Le Pen, and the far left-wing leader, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, both gaining a seat for the first time ever at the National Assembly. And of course, this very high abstention number, 57%, the highest ever on record, means that many French voters are still disenchanted by politics, are still put off by the current political landscape. In fact, the far left-wing leader, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, said that abstention was good news because it meant that it was the beginning of a general strike of the French people.
European stocks jumped the second day, boosted by French equities after the country's new president won a free hand to drive through economic reforms. The pound edged higher and the euro was steady as Brexit talks began. Miners and banks were the biggest winners as the Stoxx Europe 600 gained. The CAC 40 rallied after President Emmanuel Macron's government claimed a historic majority in France's legislature, albeit amid a miserable turnout. In Asia, the focus is on the MSCI Incorporated decision on whether to include China shares in its global indexes. Hong Kong stocks surged in advance of Tuesday's announcement. Oil erased a drop, but continues to languish at about $45 per barrel as U.S. drillers continue to add rigs, blunting OPEC-led efforts to rebalance an oversupplied market. Investors are seemingly in risk-on mode as the week begins, even as a cloud of uncertainty swirls around both UK leadership and the outlook for Brexit negotiations. Macron's decisive victory was another leg up for pro-European parties, while markets globally took the hawkish tone struck by the Federal Reserve last week in their stride. Risk assets around the world are rallying again as the carry party resumes. Societe Generale's strategist Kit Jux wrote in a client note. Fed Chair Janet Yellen did nothing to persuade the market to take its hawkish outlook for the path of interest rates seriously, he said. Read our Markets Live blog here. Here are some of the key upcoming events. Chicago Fed President Charles Evans and Fed Bank of New York President William Dudley are both due to speak in New York Monday. They are the first of a slew of Fed appearances scheduled for this week. Vice Chair Stanley Fischer is up tomorrow. Then the list reads: Eric Rosengren, Robert Kaplan, Jerome Powell, James Bullard and Loretta Mester. MSCI announces whether it approved Chinese-listed stocks in its global benchmarks. The $6.8 trillion onshore market is the world's second largest and accounts for 9% of global stock value, but has been rejected for index inclusion 3 times by MSCI over issues including capital controls and long trading halts. MSCI's decision is expected Tuesday after the close of U.S. markets. The International Paris Air Show is underway. Here are the main moves in markets. Stocks. The Stoxx Europe 600 jumped 0.7% as of 8:20 a.m. in New York after falling 0.5% last week. Futures on the S&P 500 index rose 0.3% after the underlying gauge posted a 0.1% advance last week. Currencies. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index edged higher by less than 0.1%. The yen declined 0.1% to 110.99 per dollar. The pound rose 0.1% to $1.2795. The euro was little changed as Macron's party was poised to win the biggest majority in 15 years. Bonds. The yield on 10-year treasuries fell 1 basis point to 2.14%. UK 10-year yields rose 1 basis point to 1.03%. Those in Germany also increased 1 basis point to 0.28%. Commodities. West Texas Intermediate oil gained 0.2% to $44.83 a barrel. Crude has fallen for weeks straight as U.S. drillers continue to add rigs, blunting OPEC-led efforts to rebalance an oversupplied market. Gold dropped 0.1% to $1,252.33 an ounce, heading for an 8th decline in 9 sessions. Asia. Samsung Electronics Company led gains among tech shares in the MSCI Asia Pacific Index, climbing 2.2%. Japan's Topix advanced as the yen weakened. Hong Kong stocks surged 1.2% before a decision on whether MSCI will include China shares in global indexes. The Hang Seng China Enterprises Index jumped 1.4%, the most since May 25. The Australian dollar dropped after Moody's cut the long-term ratings on the country's 4 major banks. It later erased the decline.
A very, zeitgeisty. What does this mean for reforms in France?
So, of course, with this large majority, that should mean that he'll be able to push through reforms. But with 350 seats, it is not as big as we may have expected just a week ago. The opposition from the Republican Party, the right-wing party, for example, remains strong with their allies. They still have nearly 140 seats. Then you got the National Front leader, Marine Le Pen, and the far left-wing leader, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, both gaining a seat for the first time ever at the National Assembly. And of course, this very high abstention number, 57%, the highest ever on record, means that many French voters are still disenchanted by politics, are still put off by the current political landscape. In fact, the far left-wing leader, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, said that abstention was good news because it meant that it was the beginning of a general strike of the French people.